Nebula. It goes hard, like really hard, and I absolutely recommend. This is a slightly different take on a build video, simply just because a lot of the times I see build videos of people just comparing their build against bosses, and although that's all well and good, typically you'll find that boss builds are set up just to fight a boss, or a very specific boss in some cases. And although it's not going to be the absolute hallmark of a build to see how that build dealt with getting to that boss, it is also a good indicator to show the overall playability of that build versus just the overall content that we have in the game. Which is why I've actually come up with this build. This is not intended for bosses, and this kind of can get annoying because if you are going to use this build, it's used to run around the world. Then when you get to the boss, I do advise changing builds. And the reason I do this is simply just because as a bad excuse for a content creator with limited time, I want to get to where I want to get to. If I'm going to test something on Ravager, I want to get to him as quick as possible so that I'm able to maximize the amount of time I have testing what I want to test against Ravager. So this is a build that I just use for running around, get through the content to get to where I want to be as quick as possible, and it also allows for some absolutely brilliant customizations. The overall effect of this build is just run. Just run. Nebula basically takes care of literally everything else, and then I have a long gun which I'm able to put corrosive rounds on, which allows me to get a little bit of extra damage out should I need it in case of an elite. This build is actually really simple. Like I said, it is this Nebula. We have failsafe in the mutator slot just for the odd chance of not actually consuming the mod power. However, feedback loop is another good one if you want to get more uptime on the mod. Other than that, it's mostly up to you. I would recommend failsafe for the time being. Amulet, we're using the Efflusium Enhancer for more acid and corrosive damage. I'm using Akari's Warband because the mod from Nebula does take effect from crit chance and crit damage. It's just the weapon that doesn't. Stone of Balance because it's going to affect everything. And then Shard Banded Ring, which is another 12% mod damage. And I am using Stone of Malevolence, which apparently is getting changed, which I don't understand because it works the exact same way in which Feyrin's symbol does. Granted, Stone of Malevolence does give 5% more, but the overall effect of them is exactly the same. So what you could do is swap to feedback loop and then Cataloger's Duel if this does get changed. For the long gun, I am using pulse rifle, but it doesn't really matter what one you use. Just make sure you can put corrosive rounds in just to get a bit more uptime on your corrosive and actually make sense with what it is the rest of the build is doing. When it comes to Akari's Warband, you don't have to run this. Bisected Ring would be a very good one to run as well, simply because it is infinite stamina and you can just keep running. I personally have just had better results with Akari's Warband, but it is mostly up to you. In terms of traits, all we really need is going to be Spirited and Expertise for the mod generation, as well as the cooldown reduction on your skills. For archetypes, I'm using Archon for the increase in mod damage, as well as the 3 mod power per second. Doesn't sound like a lot, but the overall effect of it does kind of help out in the long run, but it's mostly there just for the mod damage. And I'm also using Alchemist. Although you will get 10% more mod damage from using Summoner, I do find that utilizing the pets is mostly null and void. They either can't keep up with you or they just die, at which point the only thing you're really getting from Summoner there is another 10% damage as well as regrowth, which I typically spec into anyway, so I'm not really too bothered. And I would rather, just in case, have that revive or emergency heal from Alchemist, just in case. Although this build does work very well at just running through content, on occasion you will need to slow down or stop, simply just because you can't actively target the Swarm mod from Nebula. Especially in areas like Narude, it loves picking on tiny little bugs on the floor. that do nothing. There will literally be an enemy in your face and Swarm will piss off 50 meters to attack a bug that is doing nothing and can't even damage you, which I find to be very frustrating and annoying, but it can still work in these areas. Another rather frustrating thing is once you've reached your destination and you want to go and fight the boss, although this build can do bosses, it's not the best and it will take you 2-3 times longer than some of the other builds out there that a lot of people have gone over, which then means that ideally you would want to swap builds. At the moment this is annoying simply because finding rings, amulets, remembering how you had things set up, then having to touch the crystals again to reset your cooldowns, it can be a bit of a ball ache, but hopefully this is going to be addressed soon, because apparently they are planning on adding in like loadout slots, which can be quite interesting. Whether we can do this straight from UI or whether I just quick trip back to Ward 13, change build and then go back in. Anyway, good luck, have fun, don't die, it's bad for the health.